I, 26 am in what feels like the most surreal and heartbreaking situation of my life. Both of my parents recently got married to their respective partners, and somehow they both forgot to invite me. But that's just the tip of the iceberg in this family drama that's unfolding. Let me give you some background. I'm an only child, born to parents who, for the majority of my childhood, seemed to be in a constant state of conflict. They divorced when I was 10, and it was messy, to say the least. I spent most of my teenage years bouncing between their houses, always feeling like I was walking on eggshells, trying not to upset either of them. Despite the tension, I always believed they loved me in their own way. They seemed proud when I got into a good college, and they both made a big deal about how they were going to support my education. I thought that was their way of making up for the tumultuous childhood they'd given me. I graduated 4 years ago with a degree in software engineering and landed a job at a tech startup in San Francisco. It's been demanding, with long hours and high pressure, but I've been thriving on the challenge. I'll admit, I've been pretty wrapped up in my career since then. Communication with my family has been sparse, especially in the last year or so. My mom settled in Denver after the divorce, while my dad stayed in our hometown of Chicago. I try to visit when I can, but between my work schedule and the geographic distance, it's been difficult. I always assumed they understood. After all, they were the ones who always pushed me to focus on my career. Last month, I was mindlessly scrolling through social media during a rare moment of downtime when I saw something that made my heart drop. There was my mom, in a white dress, smiling next to a man I recognized as her boyfriend of 4 years. The caption read, "Just married." I blinked, refreshed the page, and stared at it in disbelief. How could this be happening? Why didn't I know about this? Before I could even process this shock, I scrolled down a bit further and saw another post that felt like a punch to the gut. There was my dad, also in wedding attire, with his girlfriend of 2 years. They too had just gotten married. I felt like I was in some kind of twisted dream. Both of my parents had gotten married, and I, their only child, hadn't been invited to either wedding. Hell, I didn't even know they were engaged. I immediately tried calling both of them, but neither picked up. I left voicemails, sent texts, and even emails, demanding an explanation. The responses I got were far from satisfying. My mom finally called me back after 5 days. Her explanation: "Oh, honey, we decided to keep it really private. We got so busy shortlisting the guests that we forgot about you." I'm so sorry, sweetie. We didn't mean any harm. Forgot about me? How does a mother forget to invite her only son to her wedding? I was speechless, hurt, and angry all at once. My dad's response came a day after I saw his photos. When I confronted him, he actually laughed it off. "Come on, son. You can't blame me and your mother for wanting to start our new lives without any reminders of our past mistakes. No offense, but who wants their past hanging over them on their wedding day? Absolutely nobody. That's who. Past mistakes? Is that what I am to them? A mistake they'd rather forget?" I was reeling from these conversations, trying to make sense of it all. That's when I decided to reach out to my grandparents. They've always been a source of comfort and wisdom, especially during the tumultuous years of my parents' divorce when I was younger. My maternal grandparents live in a small town just outside of Denver. They're retired now, but my grandfather used to be a high school principal, and my grandmother was a nurse. They've always been the steady, reliable presence in my life. When things were bad between my parents, I'd often escape to their house for weekends of homemade cookies and quiet support. When I called them, they were shocked. They hadn't known about the wedding either. In fact, they told me they'd received their invitations just a couple of days before the wedding. When they asked about my absence at the ceremony, they were told I was too busy and had declined to come on such short notice. It was the same story with my paternal grandparents. They live in Chicago, not far from my dad. My grandfather there was a factory worker all his life, and my grandmother was a homemaker. They're the salt of the earth type, always ready with practical advice and unconditional love. They too had been given last-minute invitations and fed the same lie about my absence. I was furious. Not only had my parents excluded me from one of the most important events in their lives, but they had also lied to the rest of the family about it. They had made me look like the bad guy who couldn't be bothered to attend his own parents' weddings. But as I was venting to my grandparents, they dropped another bombshell on me. Apparently, both sets of my grandparents had lent my parents a significant amount of money for my college fund. This was news to me. I had always believed my parents had paid for my education themselves. They had certainly taken credit for it over the years. Curious about the details, I asked my grandparents to tell me more. What they revealed left me stunned. The amount my parents had borrowed was more than double what my actual college expenses had been. When I told my grandparents this, they were livid. They showed me the loan agreements, which clearly stated that my parents were supposed to start repaying the money within 5 years of my graduation. It's been 5 years since I graduated, and my parents haven't paid back a single cent. In fact, they've been avoiding my grandparents' calls and messages about repayment for months now. As I dug deeper into this financial mess, more disturbing details emerged. My parents had apparently told my grandparents that my college tuition was much higher than it actually was. They had also claimed that I needed extra money for living expenses, textbooks, and even a car for commuting to classes. In reality, I had worked part-time jobs throughout college to cover my living expenses, and I certainly never got a car from them. The more I learned, the more I felt like my whole life had been built on a foundation of lies. I remembered how proud I had been of my parents for supporting my education, how I had bragged to my friends about their sacrifice. Now I realized that not only had they not made any sacrifice, but they had actually profited from the situation. I'm at a complete loss. The parents I thought I knew, the ones who I believed had sacrificed so much for my education, the ones I've been grateful to all these years, suddenly feel like strangers. Not only did they exclude me from their weddings, but they've also been lying about financial matters and effectively stealing from my grandparents. My grandparents are talking about taking legal action. They feel betrayed and want justice, but they're hesitant because they don't want to cause a rift in the family. I understand their anger, but I'm torn. These are still my parents, despite their actions. The thought of my family being torn apart by legal battles makes me sick to my stomach. I've tried reaching out to my parents again, confronting them with what I've learned. My mom broke down in tears, claiming they had only borrowed extra money because they wanted to ensure I had the best possible start in life. She said they had always intended to pay it back, but life got expensive, and they struggled to make ends meet. My dad got defensive. He argued that they had done what they thought was best at the time. He said they had planned to pay it back, but then they had to help me with jobs hunting after college. They didn't, and then they had their own bills to pay. He even had the audacity to suggest that since I'm doing well in my career now, maybe I should help them pay off the debt. Their excuses ring hollow to me now. I feel like I'm seeing them clearly for the first time, and I don't like what I see. But what do I do now? Do I support my grandparents in their pursuit of justice? Do I try to mediate and find a way to keep the family together? Or do I wash my hands of this whole mess and focus on my own life? I'm lost, Reddit. I feel betrayed, angry, and heartbroken. The foundation of trust I thought I had with my family has been shattered. How do I even begin to process this, let alone move forward? I find myself questioning everything now. Were there signs I missed over the years? Were my parents always this selfish and manipulative, and I was just too blind to see it? I remember times when they would guilt-trip me about how much they were sacrificing for my education. Now I wonder if that was just a ploy to keep me from asking too many questions. And what about their new spouses? Do they know about this financial deception? Are they complicit? Or are they just as much in the dark as I was? I can't help but wonder if my parents' rush to get married was somehow connected to this looming financial crisis. Were they hoping that by starting new lives, they could somehow escape their past debts? I'm also grappling with feelings of guilt. If I had stayed in closer contact with my family, would I have noticed something was off? Could I have prevented this situation from escalating to this point? I know, rationally, that this isn't my fault. I was just a kid when they took out these loans, and I had no way of knowing about their deception. But still, the guilt gnaws at me. The hardest part is the sense of isolation I feel. I can't talk to my coworkers or friends about this. How do you even begin to explain that your parents excluded you from their weddings and have been lying about money for years? I feel like I'm carrying this huge, dark secret, and it's affecting every aspect of my life. My work performance has started to suffer. I find it hard to concentrate, and I'm making careless mistakes. My boss has noticed and has asked if everything is okay. I brushed it off, saying I was just tired, but I know I can't keep this up for long. I've also started having trouble sleeping. I lie awake at night, replaying conversations with my parents in my head, wondering if there were clues I missed. When I do sleep, I have vivid nightmares about being abandoned or betrayed. I know I need to do something, but I'm paralyzed by indecision. If I support my grandparents in taking legal action, I could be severing my relationship with my parents forever. But if I don't, am I condoning their behavior? Am I letting them get away with taking advantage of the people who have always been there for me? Part of me wants to confront my parents face to face, to look them in the eye and demand the truth. But another part of me is afraid of what I might discover if I dig any deeper. What if there are even more lies? What if the parents I thought I knew never really existed at all? I'm also worried about my grandparents. They're not young, and this stress can't be good for their health. They've already done so much for me, and now they're facing the possibility of losing their retirement savings because they wanted to help me get an education. The guilt I feel about that is overwhelming. I've considered offering to pay back the money myself, but I don't think that's the right solution. For one thing, it's a huge amount of money, more than I can afford, even with my good job. But more importantly, it feels like that would be letting my parents off the hook for their actions. Reddit, I'm at a crossroads, and I don't know which way to turn. How do I balance my love for my family with the need for truth and justice? How do I move forward when the very foundation of my life feels like it's been built on quicksand? Any advice would be appreciated, because right now, I feel like I'm drowning in a sea of lies and betrayal. How do I find my way back to solid ground? Some of you have suggested family therapy. Others have advised me to cut ties completely. I'm still processing everything and trying to figure out my next steps. I've decided to take some time off work to deal with this situation. I'll be flying back home this weekend to have a face-to-face conversation with my grandparents and, if possible, my parents. I'll update you all on what happens. Again, thank you for your support. It means more than you know. Update 1. It's been 2 weeks since my last post, and I'm still reeling from everything that's happened. I want to thank everyone for their support and advice. Your comments have been a lifeline during this challenging time. As mentioned, I took time off work to fly back home and deal with this situation face to face. I've spent the last week having intense conversations with my grandparents and, reluctantly, my parents. It's been emotionally draining, but I'm starting to get some clarity. My grandparents' stories were heartbreakingly similar. They showed me the loan agreements and correspondence with my parents. The amount involved is staggering, more than double my actual college expenses. Both sets of grandparents confirmed that my parents had inflated my college costs and asked for additional money for living expenses, textbooks, and even a car, none of which I ever saw. My maternal grandmother, tearful, said, "We wanted to give you the opportunities we never had. We never imagined it would turn out like this." My paternal grandfather, visibly angry, added, "We worked hard all our lives. We were happy to help you, but this feels like a betrayal." The loan agreements clearly stated repayment was to begin within 5 years of my graduation. That deadline passed months ago, and despite numerous attempts to contact my parents, they've received nothing. Not even an acknowledgement of the debt. Seeing the pain in my grandparents' eyes was one of the hardest things I've ever experienced. The idea that my parents took advantage of their generosity makes me sick. Reluctantly, I reached out to my parents. My mom agreed to meet at a coffee shop. She looked older, more worn down than I remembered. When confronted, she broke down in tears. "I never meant for it to get this out of hand," she sobbed. "We were struggling financially after the divorce, and when your grandparents offered to help, it seemed like a lifeline. We told ourselves we'd pay it back quickly, but then other expenses came up, and before we knew it, we were in over our heads." About the inflated expenses, she admitted, "We thought we could use the extra money to get back on our feet. We always intended to pay it all back before anyone found out." Regarding the wedding, she claimed it was spontaneous. "We didn't want a big fuss," she said. "And honestly, we were ashamed. We knew if you were there, you might start asking questions about money. It was easier to just not have you there. My dad, predictably more defensive, insisted on talking over the phone. "Look, son," he said gruffly. "We did what we had to do. Times were tough, and we saw an opportunity. It's not like we spent the money on luxuries. It went to bills, to keeping a roof over our heads." When pressed about repayment, he snapped, "Do you think we're not stressed about this too? We're doing our best. Maybe if you hadn't been so wrapped up in your fancy job, you could have helped us out." Their responses stunned me. The parents I thought I knew would never have done this. They would never have lied, stolen, or taken advantage of their own parents. Yet here they were, making excuses, and even trying to shift blame onto me. I've spent a lot of time reflecting on my relationship with my parents and my place in this family drama. I've realized there were signs of their selfishness throughout my childhood, but I was too young or too eager for their approval to see it. I'm also grappling with my own role. While I know rationally that I'm not responsible for my parents' actions, I wonder if my distance and focus on my career inadvertently enabled their behavior. If I had been more present, would I have noticed something was wrong sooner? At the same time, I have a newfound appreciation for my grandparents. Despite everything, they've been nothing but supportive, making it clear they don't blame me and that their love is unconditional. As for next steps, I'm still unsure. My grandparents are considering legal action, and I'm torn about whether to support them. What my parents did was clearly wrong, and they should face consequences. But the idea of my family being torn apart by legal battles is heartbreaking. I've also considered offering to help repay the loans myself. It would be a significant financial burden, but part of me feels responsible for making this right. However, I worry that doing so would enable my parents' behavior and let them off the hook. For now, I've extended my time off work. I need to be here, supporting my grandparents and trying to untangle this mess. My boss was surprisingly understanding when I explained the family crisis. I'm also looking into family therapy options. Even if my parents won't participate, I think it could help me process all of this with a professional. Thank you again, Reddit, for your support. I'll update when I have more news. For now, I'm taking it one day at a time, trying to find my way through this tangled web of family secrets and lies. Update 2. It's been a week since my last update, and things have escalated dramatically. Following the advice of many commenters, I decided to organize a family meeting. I thought maybe if we all got together, we could find a way to resolve this mess. I couldn't have been more wrong. I arranged for everyone to meet at my paternal grandparents' house. It seemed like neutral ground, and they have a large living room that could accommodate us all. The tension was palpable from the moment everyone arrived. My parents came separately, each with their new spouses. This was the first time I'd met my new step-parents, and under different circumstances, I might have been curious about them. As it was, I could barely bring myself to make eye contact. My grandparents sat together on one side of the room, presenting a united front. I positioned myself between them and my parents, feeling like a mediator in a war zone. I started by laying out the facts as I understood them: the loans, the lies about college expenses, the weddings I wasn't invited to. I hoped that by stating everything plainly, we could start a constructive dialogue. That hope was short-lived. My father immediately went on the defensive. "You make it sound like we're criminals," he snapped. "We were just trying to provide for our son." "Is that such a crime?" my mother chimed in, her voice trembling. "We never meant for it to go this far. We were going to pay it all back. We needed more time." My maternal grandfather, usually the calmest person I know, couldn't contain himself. "More time?" he said, his voice rising. "It's been 5 years since the repayments were supposed to start. 5 years of dodging our calls, making excuses. How much more time did you need?" The conversation quickly devolved from there. Accusations flew back and forth. My parents tried to paint themselves as victims of circumstance, while my grandparents pointed out every lie, every broken promise. I tried to mediate, to find some middle ground, but it was like trying to stop an avalanche with my bare hands. The breaking point came when my father, red-faced and shouting, said, "Well, if you're so concerned about the money, why don't you just sue us? Go ahead. Tear this family apart over a few dollars." The room fell silent. My paternal grandmother, who had been quiet until now, stood up slowly. Her voice was low but firm as she said, "It's not about the money, son. It's about trust. It's about respect. It's about family. And you've broken all of that." My mother burst into tears. My father stormed out of the room, and their new spouses looked thoroughly uncomfortable. My stepmother tried to apologize on my father's behalf, but it felt hollow. In the aftermath of this disastrous meeting, I've been grappling with what to do next. My grandparents are more determined than ever to pursue legal action. They feel it's the only way to hold my parents accountable. I understand their position, but I'm torn. On one hand, what my parents did was undeniably wrong. They took advantage of my grandparents' generosity, lied to the entire family, and seemed to show little genuine remorse. Part of me feels they deserve whatever consequences come their way. On the other hand, the thought of my family being torn apart by legal battles makes me sick to my stomach. Despite everything, these are still my parents. The idea of them potentially facing financial ruin or even legal consequences is hard to bear. I've also been thinking about my own role in all of this. Could I offer to help repay the loans? It would be a significant financial burden, but maybe it could be a way to make things right without resorting to legal action. But then, wouldn't that just be enabling my parents' behavior? And is it really my responsibility to clean up their mess? My new step-parents add another layer of complexity to the situation. They both seemed genuinely shocked by the revelations at the family meeting. My stepmother pulled me aside afterwards and said she had no idea about any of this. She apologized profusely and said she would talk to my father. My stepfather seemed equally blindsided, though he was quieter about it. I can't help but wonder how this will affect their new marriages. Did my parents really think they could start these new relationships with such a massive secret hanging over them? As for my relationship with my parents, I'm at a loss. The trust has been shattered, and I'm not sure it can ever be fully repaired. My mother keeps calling, leaving tearful voicemails begging for forgiveness. My father has retreated into angry silence, only breaking it to send the occasional defensive text message. I've been staying with my maternal grandparents since the meeting. They've been incredibly supportive, but I can see the toll this is taking on them. They're in their 70s. They should be enjoying their retirement, not dealing with this stress and heartache. I've decided to extend my leave from work indefinitely. My boss has been understanding, but I know I can't stay away forever. At some point, I'll need to figure out how to balance dealing with this family crisis and maintaining my career. I've also started seeing a therapist. It's only been a couple of sessions, but it's helping me process everything. She's encouraged me to set boundaries with my parents and to prioritize my own mental health as we navigate this situation. Looking ahead, I'm not sure what the right path forward is. Do I support my grandparents in their pursuit of legal action? Do I try one last time to mediate between everyone? Or do I step back and let the chips fall where they may? I feel like whatever decision I make will have long-lasting consequences for my family. The weight of that responsibility is almost overwhelming. Thank you again, Reddit, for listening and for your advice. It helps to know I'm not alone in this. I'll update again when I have more news or when I've made a decision about how to proceed. For now, I'm taking it one day at a time, trying to find moments of peace amidst the chaos, and hoping that somehow, some way, my family can find a path forward from this mess. Update 3. It's been a month since my last update, and the situation has evolved dramatically. Legal proceedings have begun. My relationships with my parents have shifted, and I've done a lot of soul searching about my future. My grandparents, with my reluctant support, moved forward with legal action against my parents. They hired a lawyer specializing in family law and financial fraud. The lawsuit was filed 2 weeks ago, and my parents' reactions were polar opposites. My mother called me in tears, begging me to stop this. My father sent a curt text. "I hope you're happy now. This is on you." Their new spouses are caught in the crossfire. My stepmother said my father has become withdrawn and angry. My stepfather apparently left my mother temporarily, needing space to process everything. The reality of the legal proceedings has hit everyone hard. My grandparents, while determined, are visibly stressed. I can see the toll it's taking on them, but they assure me they're doing the right thing. My relationship with my parents is strained to the breaking point. My mother alternates between tearful pleas for forgiveness and angry accusations of betrayal. My father has gone completely silent, with the only communication being a formal letter from his lawyer warning me against making public statements about the case. This ordeal has forced me to do a lot of self-reflection. I've been grappling with feelings of guilt, wondering if I could have prevented this somehow. My therapist has been helpful, reminding me that I'm not responsible for my parents' actions. She's encouraged me to focus on what I can control. I've also been thinking about forgiveness. Can I forgive my parents for their deception? Should I? These are questions I struggle with daily. I'm trying to separate my anger at their actions from my love for them as my parents, but it's not easy. Looking to the future, I've made some big decisions. I'm moving back to my hometown permanently. I spoke with my boss, and while he was disappointed to lose me, he was understanding. I'll be working remotely for the next month to transition my projects, then leaving the company. This decision wasn't easy, but being away from my family during this crisis has made me realize what's truly important. I want to be there for my grandparents and, if possible, salvage my relationship with my parents. I've also set up a separate savings account, and I'm putting aside money each month. It's not enough to cover the entire debt, but it's a start. I'm not sure yet how I'll use this money, but it feels good to be taking concrete action. Another step I'm taking is to educate myself about financial matters. I've signed up for some online courses on personal finance and family law. I never want to be blindsided by financial deception again. As for my parents, I'm trying to keep the door open for reconciliation, but with firm boundaries. I've written them both letters, explaining my feelings and my hopes for our future relationship. I've made it clear that while I still love them, I need honesty and accountability if we're going to move forward. The legal proceedings are ongoing, and it's hard to predict how they'll end. There's talk of a potential settlement, but nothing concrete yet. I'm bracing myself for a long and potentially ugly battle. Despite all this, I'm cautiously optimistic about the future. This experience has taught me a lot about myself and about the complexities of family relationships. I'm stronger than I knew, and I'm surrounded by people who truly care about me. I don't know what the future holds, but I'm committed to facing it head on. I'm determined to break the cycle of deception and mistrust in my family, whether that means rebuilding relationships or creating new, healthier ones. Only time will tell. Thank you all again for your support and advice throughout this ordeal. Your perspectives have been invaluable. I'll update again if there are any major developments. For now, I'm focusing on the move back home and on taking care of myself as I navigate this new chapter of my life.